Yeah, something you probably shouldn't do is take a look at the competitors around that are successful and copy what they're
Which
doing.
seems like the most natural thing to do. See what's working for other people. Surely that'll work for me.
Yeah, it can be instinctual to think, oh, they're successful and they look like this.
Right.
I'm going to do that too. Don't do that. Yeah,
Okay.
You want to stand out.
Welcome to the Neon Buzz, where we offer marketing advice for oral, aesthetic, and other elective healthcare professionals. Sit back and relax while we share our digital marketing secrets to help you grow your practice.
Welcome to the Neon Buzz. I'm Catie and this is Curt, and today we're going to be talking about branding for startups, so including questions you should ask yourself, and then I'm going to pick your brain about why it all matters in the first place. So I think we're going to have a great conversation. Even if you're just thinking about rebranding, I feel like there's a lot of good questions I have to ask you about that. So this could be for anybody, but specifically we're thinking about startups in this conversation, so let's get started.
All right.
When you are first starting a practice, what is the first thing you should think about when you're creating your branding?
Well, I think it's good to consider the service provided.
Yeah.
And to know what you want the name to be.
Oh, the name first. Okay.
Yeah. I think that's important. A lot of people like to have like their last name and the service, as the name. Or you can go like the conceptual route and kind of go with like a name that's driven by an idea.
Yeah, and I feel like that in turn drives the branding. If you do that part first, then the stuff that you're adding in with all the other elements that go into branding, not just your logo.
Will tie into it. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then after you have a name, there's obviously a lot of other elements to think about. I know color plays a big part, fonts, style. We're talking about color. I feel like I see a lot of logos in the health space that are green and blue. Why is that?
Well, those colors are, cool colors, or calming. They definitely have kind of a, medical, clean, sterile feel to it.
That's very true. Very sleek and clean, yeah.
Which in that field, it's nice to portray that. If it's a medical, like a dentist, red may not be the best. You're poking people's mouth, their gums.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It may not be the best, but not saying it's impossible.
Sure.
If it was a dentist in Red Rocks,
That's a great example.
Yeah.
You need that color in there. So I can't just pick my colors for my brand because I love purple and I love green. Right? Or could I?
You could, but it shouldn't be the main reason behind it. Sometimes it can work, and sometimes it may not be the right color for that specific practice or brand.
So for a healthcare company, are there any colors you think that are just like never going to work, or you could make pretty much anything work with the right direction?
Well, with the right finesse, you probably could make just about any color work. Some colors will be more challenging, for sure.
It's a good way to stand out, though,
Yeah.
So
you don't see a lot of orange.
Really?
Yeah.
I figured it'd be like yellow or something that you don't see a lot of.
Yeah, you don't see much.
I mean, that's in the same
Well, a lot
vein.
of the warm colors in the medical space aren't really prevalent, but they can work, though. We've done it. We've had clients that have warmer color palettes, and it just takes a little finesse.
Yeah. We talked about imagery a little bit. Where does good imagery come from when you're, talking about if your practice is not going to be your last name orthodontics? Where should that imagery be pulled from?
Well, I think when you're talking about imagery in the logo, kind of graphic imagery, you could take inspiration for that imagery from like the physical environment that the town, city, geographical location that you're in. That could be a driving factor. Or if you want to take some sort of imagery that is related to the service that's provided, that could be a good thing. And I think when somebody sees a logo that sees a particular graphic or an image in that logo that kind of represents the service provided, it helps. It helps the communication. It helps the viewer know what this practice is about, what this brand is about.
Yeah.
And that can be a good thing.
Yeah.
The problem with that, though, is sometimes that can be like played out. People will approach that direction the same like over and over from brand to brand. And so if you go that route, it's nice to try to approach that at a different angle.
Yeah, in like a new way.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. When we're talking about imagery, it kind of makes you think about your audience. How does that play a role in, creating branding?
Once you figure out the target audience and the demographic that you're going after, you want to create something that is appealing to them. If you're a pediatric dentist, you're probably going to want a logo that's bright and fun and playful and something that, a kid would want to wear on their t-shirt, But if you're more of like an aesthetics client or a plastic surgery group, you'd probably want something that's a little more sophisticated, elegant, and, modern.
I imagine the fonts also have a lot to do with that and leading that direction.
Yeah, fonts, there's a lot of characteristics in fonts that can lend to different concepts. So.
Yeah. I know I've talked to Blaine before, one of our graphic designers. He said one of his biggest pet peeves is when people warp text because there are so many font options now. And that is, some people's entire career is typography. So very interesting how, we think color, I think would be the first thing people think about in leading the direction of a brand. But I think font also tells a big part of the story. I'm sure you run into that when you're thinking about audiences.
The font is a huge driving factor.
Yeah.
And there's so many different font styles and variants out there.
Is there a certain number of fonts you should have in your branding? Is there like a rule?
There's rules, but rules can be broken.
Okay.
3. 3 is the rule. The idea behind that is you'll have a particular font that you use for headlines, big text, and then a different font that pairs nicely with that you'd use for like the smaller body copy.
Okay.
And then you can also have an additional one that can be used for like call outs or to add a little character or...
Those are more stylistic
fonts?
Yeah,
it could be a little more stylistic. Typically, you can also use the font used in the logo as one of the brand fonts, or that font can just be the logo font designated only for the logo, not used anywhere else. And that's also not a bad idea.
Okay, yeah, that definitely ties into your audience because I feel like you're not going to use a super bubbly font for, a sleep clinic for, older folks.
Right,
so
yeah.
That makes sense.
And you wouldn't use a very stylistic, wild font for the small, like, body copy text that you have.
Yeah, hard to read on different scales, so that makes sense. And then what about colors? Is there a certain amount of colors?
Typically, I like to stick with around 3, sometimes 2 to 3 primary colors that you want to be distinguished as like the brand colors. These represent the brand. But then you can also have secondary colors that, and it's nice on websites to have a kind of complementary color that stands out and pops and can draw your eye towards a particular call to action.
Yeah, I've noticed that. Yes, I've seen that before.
We do that a lot here.
Yeah, that accent color that's added in there that doesn't look like it would go with the rest, but it is included in little elements. Even, on graphics that you guys make, having that pop of color always helps highlight different things.
Yeah, it's nice to have contrast in the color palette. You want lights and darks that complement each other.
So you wouldn't want like a dark blue and black to be your 2 colors. You would
Probably
need some
not.
light in there?
Yeah. You would want something that kind of stands out.
Okay.
Because it can all kind of get washed out if it's all the same tone and shade.
That makes sense. I know when you guys are building, branding out and you guys get together and brainstorm, one of my favorite things that you guys do is build clients' stories into their branding. How do you pick apart that story? How do you extract that from a client?
Well, on the front end, we try to learn as much as we can about the client, the practice, where they are, what that market looks like in that area, and to get a feel for what they aspire to be and how they aspire to grow. And that story can be driven by the name of the practice, or it can be driven by like the mission of that, what that practice wants their customers, their patients, what they want them to experience when they come.
And I feel like that's what you guys do really well is understanding those intangible things, grabbing an emotion from a mission statement and saying, this logo conveys that feeling, right? That's hard for someone who's not a professional to do, but you guys do it really well.
Thank you.
So I always like asking the stories behind the new ones that I see come out, because there's always tiny little details that you might not think of that you guys build in. Even sometimes it's like hidden imagery, which is always fun, because then it's fun for the brand to tell the story behind, you've been looking at this logo forever and you had no idea that this was hidden in there. So I'm a startup. I might have an office. I might not have an office. If I don't have an actual space yet, does that matter for creating my branding? How do the two go together? Because I imagine that they kind of correlate a little bit.
The physical space, office, whatever, and the visual brand logo, it's nice for those to be cohesive and on the same page. Sometimes a startup will have, a location that their office is going to be, and it's, got a very particular look to it.
Right.
And so if that's the case, you would want that visual brand to fit with that to a degree. You don't want it to feel like they were created worlds apart. If the office space is very clean and modern and updated, you wouldn't want the logo to have a vintage or like rustic feel. It may not fit.
Would you say that one drives the other, so it doesn't necessarily mean you need to do one before the other, but,
Yeah.
think about
one
what you
can
have?
drive the other for sure. I mean, in an ideal world, the space will be developed the same time the logo will. So they can build that story together.
Yes.
Most of the time, that's not the case.
Yeah, I mean, even offices that rebrand, it's time for a remodel at their office, and they say this is a chance, to give everything a refresh, and then it's kind of all happening together.
Yeah.
So we've talked a lot about the things that you should be doing, questions you should be asking yourself when you're creating a logo and a brand. Is there anything that you would not do?
Yeah, something you probably shouldn't do is take a look at the competitors around that are successful and copy what they're
Which
doing.
seems like the most natural thing to do. See what's working for other people. Surely that'll work for me.
Yeah, it can be instinctual to think, oh, they're successful and they look like this.
Right.
I'm going to do that too. Don't do that. Yeah, you want to stand out. The visual brand of that practice can elevate you above the competition.
Right.
Just off the first impression. When somebody sees that logo and sees that brand and the different, materials that they've got, it can really make them stand out and change people's perception.
Yeah, I feel like if you're new to the scene as well, and the doctor down the street has blue and the doctor around the corner has blue, you picking the same blue is not the best option.
Right. Even if it works for them.
Yeah.
Yeah, you want to stand out.
Yeah. If you have the purple branding, it's like, oh, that's the new office.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense.
Uh-huh.
So we're not going to look at our competitors, but where would people go or should people go to find inspiration for their branding? Because people need some help,
Yeah. I mean, you can look anywhere and get inspiration from anything. If you like Katie's cupcakes, her color palette that she uses, and think, oh, I could use that. I'm not a bakery by any means, but those colors kind of evoke an emotion that I like. You could use that. But to just generally look at different designs and different brandings, Pinterest is a great resource to find, contemporary logos, playful logos, modern logos.
Yeah.
You can just search anything and find a whole world of examples,
Katie's Cupcakes was my 5th grade menu project, my first branding project. Maybe I should put that on Pinterest.
Maybe a potential future startup.
Yeah, just, in case anyone needed inspiration. I was really, really good, in the 5th grade.
Brick and
Still
mortar
great.
coming soon.
Yeah, coming to a location near you soon. So I'm going to Pinterest for inspiration. Are you saying that I should not look at logos? I should just look at like other images and pick? Or is it fine to look at other industries and see what they're doing for their logos?
Yeah, I would say look at your industry, the logos in your industry, logos in different industries, because you may think, oh, I have this great idea for a logo. And if you create it and you love it, that's great. But that same concept could be done a million times in that same industry.
Yeah.
And then you just kind of fall into, not standing out, just kind of blending in with everyone else.
And you don't want to blend in because this is your first impression, which I feel like goes into the why behind branding and why it's important to have it super established from the start. Is it's your first impression to the world, not just to new patients, but to everyone in your community. This is who we are. This is, what our staff is like, what our office is like. This is what we stand for. And I feel like it all goes into, the first impression. So say I have everything ready for my startup. I've got the office. I've hired some staff. I've done some training. I'm like, logo's the last thing I'm going to do. And it's no problem. My neighbor, John Doe, did his logo on Canva. I'll just hop on there and use a template and make a logo. I'm going to assume that you absolutely hate that idea. So what should I do instead, or why is that not a good idea?
Well, there's just a lot of limitations with that.
Yeah.
When we create logos, we create a logo that's versatile. There's different variations of that logo, stacked, horizontal, different color variations. And then the output in itself, we have full control over that. We can give you every file type, that you need, whereas...
That is frustrating about Canva.
Yeah, Canva, you get a JPEG that you can use. And
just like with variations, you're putting your logo in a lot of different places, whether it be on a billboard, the side of your building, but it's also in a little circle that's going to be about this small on my screen for social media and my profile picture. And that probably looks a lot different than it's going to be on the outside of your building.
Right, yeah.
So you have to think about all of those things. And that's, I think, one of the pros to going and having a professional do it, because they're thinking of all those things. That's something that you guys, I'm sure, it's not an afterthought. It's one of the first things you think about.
Yeah, it's very intentional with, keeping that in mind. It's going to be printed. It's going to be digitally represented. A lot of times the logo can just be simplified to a specific, just the logo mark itself.
What is a logo mark?
So the logo mark, typically a logo consists of different components. The text, which is, the logo type. And then the logo mark is usually like an icon or a piece of imagery that is part of the logo that they work together and can be also used on their own, like for, social media icon, just the logo mark itself. You want your brand to be consistent on all platforms to really promote, customer and patient trust. When a brand is established and is consistent on all platforms, everywhere that you see it, you begin to trust that they know what they're doing.
Yeah, it's like these people know what they're doing. They are professionals because they have thought about everything. Yeah. Yeah,
and then when you see the same brand all over and it's consistent, it's memorable. You start to remember I've seen that before, and they've done,
You have associations with it, and it's from that first impression that we just talked about. I feel like they go hand in hand. And the cohesion, I feel like, is a very important part to tell the full story. Yeah. You're building in bits of, a practice's story into their branding, but without the consistency, I feel like you don't get the full picture.
Yeah, and I think that all the different platforms are different opportunities to inform people about that brand story.
Can you talk about consistency and how it goes hand in hand with longevity? Obviously, nobody wants to rebrand every 2 years. It's actually a terrible idea. So how do the two go hand in hand?
Yeah, well, trends come and go.
Yeah.
And sometimes people fall into following trends. They design a logo based on what's trending right now, which may, in a few years, people look back and say, why were we using fonts that look like that? Or that font was used in every logo from that era,
And then it's a telltale sign.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then that's when you would probably want to rebrand if, the logo that you've got is trending, a little dated. It would be good to update the branding then. And, and it's always nice to create a logo that's timeless, that can stand the test of time, that's not reliant on what's cool right now, you know, but what is functional, what works, and what looks good.
What are some of the super trendy things you see?
Well, I mean, I feel like today, like you can still see logos and you can tell that it was probably made in the 90s or
I mean,
early
we could do an
millennium.
entire episode, I feel like, on, when it's time to rebrand. That would be pretty
I know.
fun.
There's a lot that goes into it. But
Yeah.
right now, if you were looking at what's trending right now, you could maybe create a logo that has very stylistic text.
As like the headline font, yeah.
Yeah, it's
the
like
logo
the
font.
logo type. Yeah.
logo
If
type.
you picked a font that was like very stylistic and had a lot of character and you think, oh, this looks cool. I see a lot of people are using this font on social media. But a couple of years from now, you may look at that new font that was cool
Yeah.
and be like, no one uses that anymore. And it's kind of funny looking.
Yeah, I mean, I can think of quite a few logos that have that similar, scripty, a little bit bubbly font. And
Well, 10 years ago, there was a font that everybody was using in all their, it was a new font that everybody loved and it was everywhere.
what was it?
Lobster.
Lobster. I've used
Yeah.
lobster.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
That's what I was thinking of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then now if I see it, I think nobody uses it anymore because it was so
It's like
played out,
Comic Sans.
Yeah. Well, there's a whole debate on the Comic Sans. But
What's the debate?
Well, that it should never be used, and some people think it's
Oh.
perfect for certain applications, and
Interesting.
Yeah.
I always use Comic Sans on like any paperwork that I was doing that I was like, oh, I want to make it cute. Comic Sans. Because it was
yeah.
still legible, still easy to read, but it was not,
looks hand done.
Yeah, I was like Times New Roman again, guys. Come on.
Yeah. Comic
Comic
Sans is
Sans.
great for comic books,
I
hence the name.
never. Oh, well, duh.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not really writing many comic books,
know.
but so consistency, I think, also allows for brand recognition. So the longer that you have your branding, the longer you have brand recognition, and then you can kind of pare down too. Like you couldn't always use the golden arches and know, oh, that's McDonald's or the Nike swoosh, but now they can stand alone.
If you want to do like a rebrand or a refresh, it's
Yeah.
nice to not do like a full overhaul.
Sure.
But to take what is already established and what works and to just improve on it with subtle changes, I think can really just keep that visual look up to date.
Yeah, and it all goes back to the beginning, which is hopefully when you're building your brand from the ground up and you hire someone who thinks about those things.
Right. That thinks about that on the front end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Makes for a lot less trouble down the road.
Right.
We just covered a lot of really great things for startups, and even if you're like considering a refresh, I feel like a lot of the points that we talked about are good to keep in mind. The two kind of go hand in hand. You have any last stance on branding for startups, or maybe something that people really shouldn't do?
Yeah. Don't do it yourself. Hire the professionals that they do it day in and day out and have tons of experience doing it, and it'll get you off on the right foot.
That makes sense. Anything you should do?
Yeah, research. Know your audience, ask the right questions, know the answers to those questions.
I feel like that's what it all boils down to.
Yeah,
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Lots of good information, do's, don'ts, questions to ask yourself before you even start. And then we covered the why behind why, this all matters in the first place. So thanks for listening. Like, subscribe, follow wherever podcasts are found. That sounded really like I was in my YouTuber era, right?
That's right.
That was good. And we will see you next time. Bye.
Bye.